오늘도 클릭해주셔서 감사합니다. 구독과 좋아요 부탁드립니다.
상상 속에서만 가능했던 실현 불가능한 괴물자주포를 한국은 무려 1000대 이상 보유하게 되었다. 전세계 자주포 시장 점유율 80% 이상을 차지하며 완벽히 세계 최고의 자주포로 그 이름을 높이고 있는 K9 자주포가 원 운용국이자 개발국인 한국에서 대대적인 성능 개량 작업을 통해 타의 추종을 불허하는 미친 성능의 자주포로 거듭나게 될 전망입니다. 지난 26일 한국방위사업청은 국방장관 주재 아래 제155회 방위사업추진위원회를 가졌습니다. 이 자리에서 주목할 만한 안건이 의결되었는데 바로 K9 자주포 2차 성능 개량 체계 개발 본격화 작업이었죠. 방사청이 보도한 K9 2차 성능 개량 블록 1은 첫 번째, 화력 지원 및 대화력전의 핵심 전력인 K9 자주포의 타격 능력 향상, 두 번째, 포탑 자동화를 통한 운용 인원 감소 및 승무원의 안전성이 향상된 자주포의 확보가 목표라고 했습니다. 즉, 그토록 기다려온 한국군의 K9A2 성능 개량안이었죠. 우선적으로 눈에 띄는 부분은 바로 개발이 완료된 A2 버전의 핵심 기술 포탄 자동 장전 장치가 탑재된다는 것입니다. K9A2는 사격할 표적의 좌표 등 제원만 주어지면 포탄과 장약을 자동 시스템이 스스로 운반 및 장착하는데요. 사수는 자동 조준 장치를 통해 조준이 완료된 이후 버튼만 누르는 작업만 수행하면 됩니다. 이렇게 K9A2에서 발사되는 155mm 고위력 포탄은 1분당 무려 9발 사격이 가능합니다. 기존 분당 6발 사격이 가능했던 A1 버전보다 50% 향상된 수치입니다. 전문가들은 분당 발사 속도의 증가로 인해 단시간 안에 적 지역을 집중 포격할 수 있는 능력이 배가되어 기존 화력 대비 30% 이상 끌어올릴 수 있다고 분석하였죠. 또한 K9A2 성능 개량으로 인해 얻는 효과는 단순히 화력과 발사 속도 증가로 그치지 않습니다. 바로 현대전에서 가장 중요한 이슈로 부각되고 있는 인력 부족 현상을 상쇄할 수 있게 되었다는 것인데요. 기존 모델에 총 5명의 승무원이 필요했다면 K9A2는 3명으로 대폭 줄어 운용할 수 있게 됩니다. 예전에는 조종수를 제외한 포반장, 사수, 부사수, 1번 포수 4명이 모두 장전 및 송탄, 그리고 사격까지 그 임무를 맡아야 했습니다. 포반장이 사격 재원을 산출하고 포수가 포탄을 이송기에 올려놓으면 부사수가 장약을 넣은 뒤 폐쇄기를 닫고 최종적으로 사수가 격발 버튼을 누르는 체계였죠. 이 과정을 이제 자동장전 장치 도입으로 인해 간소화할 수 있게 된 것입니다. 또한 승무원 중 한 명이 다가오는 근접한 적을 상대로 K6 중기관총을 쏘기 위해 포탑 밖으로 나가야 했다면 K9A2에서는 RCWS가 장착돼 자주포 내부에서 적외선 카메라로 주간은 물론 야간에서도 4km 이내에 숨어있는 적을 찾아내 원격으로 기관총 사격을 가할 수 있게 되었습니다. 승무원이 저격당할 일이 없어져 생존성이 비약적으로 향상되게 된 것이죠. 이 밖에 포탑 크롬 도금으로 인한 수명 증가, 에어컨 설치, 포탑 상부 특수 방탄감 보강 등이 포함될 것으로 보입니다. 더욱이 무엇보다 중요한 것은 이번에 한국군이 운용하고 있는 K9 자주포를 개량하게 되면서 본격적인 K9A2의 규모의 경제 그리고 향상된 수출 잠재력을 얻을 수 있게 되었다는 것입니다. 방사청은 2023년부터 2027년까지 4년간 2조 3,600억 원을 투입하여 기존 K9의 개량을 완료할 것이라고 밝혔는데요. 현재 한국군이 운영하고 있는 K9 자주포의 전체 대수는 1,300여 대, 대당 약 18억 원을 들여 전체 물량을 개량할 것으로 보입니다. 특히 현재 하나가 K9A2의 적극적인 세일즈를 추진하고 있는 가운데 한국군의 이러한 선제적인 K9A2의 운용은 잠재 수출국들에게 긍정적인 영향을 끼칠 수밖에 없는데요. 지속적인 개량 및 원활한 유지보수 그리고 생산 라인 풀가동으로 인한 빠른 납기가 보장되기 때문입니다. 이러한 측면은 특히 방산 분야에서 상당히 중요한 부분이죠. 해외 전문가들은 K9A2를 미국의 괴물자주포 XM2001과 비교하곤 합니다. 크루세이더라는 명칭으로 불렸던 이 자주포는 스펙상으론 그 당시뿐만 아니라 현재 나와도 세계 최고의 스펙을 가지고 있다고 평가받을 만큼 상상 이상의 성능을 가지고 있는데요. 세계 최대 54 구경장 155mm XM297 캐논포를 채용하였고 자동장전 장치와 MACS 장약을 사용해 분당 10발 사격이 가능하며 또한 포탄 무인화를 통해 승무원 수를 3명으로 줄였으며 3명의 승무원 모두 각자 대형 컬러 다기능 디스플레이를 통해 작전 수행에 필요한 모든 정보를 획득 및 관제할 수 있었던 차원이 다른 자주포였습니다. 그런데 이렇게 좋은 자주포가 세상에 나와보지도 못하고 사업이 무산되어 비운의 자주포로 불리기도 하는데요. 사업이 무산된 주된 이유는 바로 $10,000,000, 약 130억 원이 넘는 높은 가격 때문이었습니다. 이미 20년 전에 K9 자주포의 3배가 넘는 가격을 형성했던 것이며 그 비싸다는 펜저어비치 2000의 80억보다도 훨씬 비싼 가격이었습니다. 2002년 5월 당시 미 국방장관이었던 도널드 럼스펠드는 총 프로그램 코스트 110억 달러 규모의 크루세이더 사업이 소요되는 예산에 비해 쓰임새가 적다며 정식으로 취소를 시켰습니다. 럼스펠드는 그 당시 이라크전을 앞두고 포병대대의 수송작전 능력을 가장 최우선으로 삼았는데 크고 무거운 중량을 지닌 크루세이더의 수송 이동 능력이 떨어진다는 점을 들여 결국은 취소시켰습니다. 실제로 사업이 통과되더라도 막대한 비용으로 인해 도입할 수 있는 국가가 미국을 제외하고는 없으니 이로 인한 막대한 유지보수 비용으로 오래 운용되기도 힘들었을 테죠. 이처럼 방산 예산은 늘 한도가 있기에 무기체계의 규모의 경제 구축은 무기의 존폐에 직접적으로 영향을 끼칠 수 있는 중요 요소라고 할 수 있습니다. 그리고 현재 그 크루세이더의 성능과 거의 동일하고 가격이나 중량 같은 단점마저도 상쇄시킨 괴물자주포가 바로 한국의 K9A2이죠. 그러니 가히 21세기 자주포의 표본이라고 봐도 무방한데 예전에는 K9 자주포가 독일의 펜저어비치 2000과 비교되며 누가 더 낫네마네하는 상황이었지만 A2 버전을 통해 이제 펜저어비치 2000과의 비교는 더 이상 무의미하며 성능만 놓고 비교하고자 한다면 크루세이더 XM2001과 비교하게 되는 상황입니다. 실제로 미국 최대 군사 매체 중 한 곳인 태스크 앤 퍼포스는 왜 한국의 자주포가 세계 최고일까 라는 제목으로 K9 자주포와 XM1001 크루세이더를 비교하는 보도를 내기도 했는데요. 태스크 앤 퍼포스의 정식 유튜브 채널은 구독자 무려 106만 명을 보유할 만큼 그 영향력이 상당하고 진행자인 전 미육군 참전용사인 크리스 캐피의 맛깔난 입담으로 전세계 많은 밀리터리 팬들의 사랑을 받고 있습니다. 크리스 캐피는 K9 자주포와 한국의 포병대대에 어떤 말을 남겼는지 함께 보시죠. Let's get it!
The self-propelled Korean K9 Thunder artillery. Second, the K-10 ammunition companion vehicle for fast reloading. And third, the biggest innovation of all, the ability to have basically the equivalent of fully automatic artillery cannon. The 155mm K9 Thunder is combat proven against North Korea. Today, it's an extremely successful vehicle with over 1,700 having been produced. Each one costs about $2.9 million per unit, so you can almost trade one in for the cost of a single home in America. The K9 has many of the same capabilities that were originally supposed to be in the United States prototype XM2001 Crusader, but that $11 billion program in the United States was canceled. With its autoloader and new fire control system, it has an insanely high rate of fire for artillery, 10 rounds per minute. That's 4 rounds faster per minute than the old technology. So this is what you call in when you need an entire mountain removed from the face of the earth.
Licensed version of the K9 Thunder is incredible. Turkey, Estonia, Australia, India, Finland, Norway, Poland, Egypt all want a piece of that South Korean burst artillery. 624 of these will be produced inside of Poland. Each license South Korea sells to a foreign country, they get about $1.7 billion, and their defense company Hanwha helps set up the manufacturing franchises. It's like a delicious, spicy McDonald's franchise, but for artillery pieces. So what is it about South Korean artillery technology that makes everybody want it? The development of this weapon tells us a lot about the South Korean people's history, their culture, and what matters to them.
It evolved under the intense pressure to counter increasingly radical North Korean dictators. The origins of the K9 Thunder are actually closely tied to the Korean War. This weapon really could only ever evolve from a country that has technically been in a state of war for the past 70 years, while literally staring down thousands of artillery barrels along a 160-mile front line in the world's most heavily fortified border, the Korean Demilitarized Zone. Artillery really defines this entire region. To put the artillery threat in Korea into perspective, North Korea could bombard Seoul with over 10,000 projectiles every minute. For context, according to data from the European Commission, rough estimates indicate that Russia fires between 40,000 and 50,000 artillery shells per day, compared to the 6,000 shells per day on average that Ukrainian forces expend, which means that in the absence of counter-battery fire, a quick response from Seoul, it would only take North Korea 5 minutes to fire more rounds than what we've learned the Russo-Ukrainian war consumes in an average day. This is why the development of artillery weapons has historically been so important, not just to military strategy for South Korea, but also North Korea. North Korea likes to call this artillery power by a metaphor, the Sea of Fire. In fact, a quick search of the official North Korean English language news site, KCNA, which has served as the government's mouthpiece in North Korea for more than half a century, shows just how common the phrase is. Because when the Korean War hostilities ended in 1953, both countries remained at war, and so they immediately switched over to pouring money into an arms race. You might be surprised that North Korea actually held the economic and technological advantage over South Korea until the late 1960s. This is when they received the American M107 175mm self-propelled howitzer. In 1971, as the US was trying to phase out the system in favor of newer systems, the M107 had a fire rate which was about 1 round per minute, which wasn't mind-blowing, but it did have greater accuracy at 25-mile maximum firing range. In response, the North Koreans fired back with their very own M1978 Koksan, a 170mm self-propelled gun that was basically a carbon copy of the Soviet-made S-23. This created a problem though for our soldiers. It matched the firing range of the American M107, but also saved on headcount, needing 5 fewer crew members. It was like the military version of speeding through the express checkout lane, ha 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 ha. On top of that, they introduced rocket-assisted projectiles, which stretched their range for an extra 12 miles, putting their southern counterparts' abilities for artillery to shame at the time. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses for the Koksan. It had a much lower operational range and moved about as fast as a snail carrying a heavy backpack. And when it came to rounds per minute, let's just say it wasn't winning any speed contests at 2 rounds every 5 minutes. At this point, both sides had a glaring common problem. Their artillery crews were left hanging out to dry. As mobile warfare took center stage, the vulnerability of artillery crews working in an open-air environment became painfully clear. With crews exposed to the elements of flying shrapnel all over the place, it wouldn't take much to render a gun combat ineffective, even if the cannon itself wasn't damaged or destroyed, but the soldiers manning it were. To top it off, North Korea started cranking out towed howitzers and M1978 Koksans like they were going out of style. Analysts believe the North produced 500 of them, which forced South Korea to start thinking about ways to keep the balance of power. A study from the RAND Corporation sheds light on how artillery battle inside Korea shaped the Hermit Kingdom. At that time, the North feared that South Korea would eventually catch up to them in firepower. The Kim dynasty realized that if it didn't retain the reins of power, the great leader and his family were unlikely to even stay alive. When the stakes are this high, all modesty goes out the window, so the regime decided to double down on artillery, as well as new kinds of munitions that the artillery could deliver, the development and production of weapons of mass destruction. The North Korean leader did this because he had caught on early how weak authoritarian regimes could be toppled and replaced more easily without WMDs. In response, the North Korean regime doubled down on artillery and the South Korean military's lack of battlefield artillery protection in December 1983. Officials from the US and South Korea agreed to co-produce a South Korean licensed variant of the M109A2 Paladin, and although South Korea wanted to produce every part of the vehicle domestically to be more self-reliant and grow their own defense industry, the conditions of the agreement meant that 37% of the parts still needed to be imported. This frustrated the heck out of South Korea's military, because despite being an excellent system in its own right, it was still decades old, meaning it needed to be upgraded. To solve the range advantage that North Korea's new M1989 Koksan had gained over them. To keep up with the edge of the arms race, the Republic of Korea ROK Ministry of Defense ordered the development of a new system with a longer range, a faster firing rate, and a higher amount of mobility, using the experience gained from the licensed production of the K-55, and entrusted this important task to the South Korean Agency for Defense Development. Interestingly enough, the ADD researchers in South Korea had already been collecting data since 1983 in anticipation of a future artillery system. They believed that burst fire and quick relocation would become the dominant factors in artillery battles, and built an automatic loading system for testing in 1984. Much later, in 1987, the South Korean ADD offered an upgraded plan to the existing K-55 inspired by the United States M109 howitzer improvement program. But it was rejected by the Republic of Korea Army in 1988. As a result, the development of what would become the K-9 Thunder began with no intellectual property strings to hold them back. The work started in 1989, and Samsung Aerospace Industries was invited to participate, which is now Hanwha Defense. However, the technical requirements for the new weapon were ever increasing as the DMZ got more and more fortified. To put it into perspective, the International Institute for Strategic Studies estimates that North Korea has more than 21,000 artillery pieces and multiple rocket launchers along the front, compared to the 11,000 from South Korea. This is 7 times more than all the combined artillery deployed to the Ukrainian war by both sides. And the rest of the numbers on the Korean Peninsula are just like that. Insane amounts of equipment that are the product of each side preparing for decades for an all or nothing massive battle. My grandfather, Peter Margarita, was drafted to be an artilleryman in the Korean War, and they did so many fire missions that they were nearly deaf after the first month, he said. He had to hold his hand on the telephone to feel the vibration of the fire mission phone ringing so that he knew there was a call for a fire mission for his gun section. But the K9 had its share of problems during development. It turns out the system had the same problems that Germany's PZH-2000 saw in its development. You see, the long .52 caliber barrel turned out to be more difficult to balance than the older K55 it was supposed to improve upon. And the mechanism used to fix the problem made the hydraulic generators sound so loud that the crew would rather cover their ears than aim the gun. So a group of small folks from the ADD and Seoul National University of Science and Technology had to work out a fancy math model to fix the problem without having to change the design entirely. Based on review of the required operational capability in October 1992, a firing rate of 3 shots within 15 seconds was chosen for economic feasibility. The rationale was that it was difficult for a target to be out of fatal range within 15 seconds after the first impact, and that the firing rate can be shortened depending on training level. When the Joint Chiefs of Staff finalized the system development agreement in late August 1993, the Defense Ministry approved the prototype development plan in September, and the President approved the project in early October. In 1993, the system was designed to be able to outrange any future North Korean artillery system with a maximum effective range of 25 miles or 40 kilometers with standard ammunition, and up to 31 miles or 50 kilometers with special extended range munitions. One of the most important aspects is the armor. The MIL-12 560H armor on the K9 is unique to Korea. It's actually made by their Korean POSCO Iron and Steel Company. Only their domestic version gets this special steel. You may have never heard of POSCO, but in 2010, they were actually the world's largest steel manufacturing company by market value, and they were named the entire world's 146th largest corporation by Fortune Global 500. POSCO currently operates 2 integrated steel mills in South Korea. Since this was domestically developed armor steel plates that were being used for the first time, the South Korean military researchers decided to produce and compare both imported and domestic materials to reduce the risk. In the meantime, Samsung began to train and employ master craftsman welders whose skills were verified by the U.S. Aberdeen Military Research Facility. U.S. researchers verified that the South Korean steel plates perform better than imported armor plates. South Korea's Agency for National Security Planning, which is like their CIA, had been gathering information from North Korean defectors that painted a threat that couldn't be dismissed. It indicated that North Korea's goals in the event of war were to use overwhelming firepower and speed of action to conduct a one-blow, non-stop attack, with poison bullets thrown into the mix for good measure. Remember when I mentioned weapons of mass destruction? Well, that includes chemical weapons, not just nukes. And it was back then that North Korea began major shifts that favored chemical warfare. For example, many of the armored vehicles that North Korea produced were no longer armored personnel carriers, but rather self-propelled artillery suitable for the delivery of chemical weapons. They could fire out these new weapons. Now, the reason that this is important for the development of the K9 Thunder is because it informs one of the most important but often overlooked features of the self-propelled artillery vehicle that you can probably guess. Its MBC ability, the ability to protect and pressurize the interior of the hull to be safe from chemical weapons. This is why the K9 has a pressurized seal hull. It's very likely that the inner lining of the crew's compartments have neutron shielding to protect against the radiation from nuclear explosions, as well as CBRN positive pressure and air conditioning systems, which can also be found in modern armored vehicles. The way MBC overpressure systems work is that they're essentially pressurized air blowers that blow air in from the outside of the vehicle through special filters. So what happens if the K9 spends its 48 shells and runs out of ammo during a chemical attack? Does the lowest enlisted private have to run back through the gas into the rear and reload? No, the K-10 armored ammunition resupply vehicle was designed to meet the demands of modern warfare by providing efficient and automated ammunition support at a rate of 12 rounds per minute, and it's compatible with various types of ammunition. It even allows for selection of specific projectiles and charging the required types of shells even in darkness. Right now, the South Korean K9 Thunder is the most popular tracked self-propelled howitzer system with over 2,000 units in service around the globe. It has over 52% of the market share.
라고 했습니다. 해외에서도 이처럼 극찬하고 있는 K9 자주포에 대해 중국은 질투를 넘어 근거 없는 비난까지 쏟아내고 있습니다. 최근 중국 매체 인민망은 한국의 K9 자주포 이젠 스타처럼까지는 보이지 않는다 라는 기사를 통해 한국의 K9 자주포가 영국 자주포 도입 사업에서 아처 자주포에게 패배했으며 한국은 낮은 방산 기술을 지녀 늘 해외 기술을 의존하기에 급급했다라고 억가를 시전했습니다. 그러면서 마지막으로 중국을 포함한 많은 나라에서 경쟁작들을 개발하고 있고 또 기술 수준도 높아지고 있어 이제 한국의 방산 수출은 곧 한계에 이르게 될 것이라는 저주까지 쏟아냈는데요. 중국이 이러는 거 보니까 K9이 아주 잘하고 있다는 걸 알 수 있네요. 오늘도 짱 증서 발급 완료. 오늘의 한 줄평, 중국말처럼 실제로 요즘 많은 국가들이 중국산 무기에 그렇게 환장한다 하더라. 말 그대로 진짜 환장한다고. 이상으로 리얼리즘이었습니다. 여러분의 생각은 어떠신가요? 현명하고 지혜로운 여러분의 의견을 지금 댓글에 남겨주세요. 감사합니다.